Something just happened that could change the trajectory of global politics overnight, and most people still don't fully understand the gravity of it. A U.S. fighter jet has reportedly crashed inside Iran, not near Iran, not over international waters, inside Iranian territory. And now, right now, a search operation is underway for 2 missing crew members. Let me say that again. An American military aircraft is down in Iran, and 2 U.S. personnel are unaccounted for. Let that sink in. Because this is not just another military accident. This is not just another headline you scroll past. This is the kind of moment that, historically, has triggered international crises, diplomatic standoffs, and in some cases, outright conflict. Now think about the timing. Tensions between Washington and Tehran have already been simmering. Proxy conflicts, economic sanctions, regional power struggles, all of it building pressure beneath the surface. And then suddenly, this. A U.S. jet goes down inside one of the most geopolitically sensitive countries on the planet. So the immediate question is obvious. What exactly happened? Was this a mechanical failure? Was the aircraft on a covert mission? Was it intercepted? Was it shot down? Or, and here's where things start to get uncomfortable, was it never supposed to be there in the first place? Because if that jet was operating inside Iranian airspace without authorization, we are looking at a completely different level of escalation. And if Iran now has access to that crash site, if they reach those crew members first, then this situation becomes something far more dangerous than a simple recovery mission. Think about that for a second. 2 American service members, potentially on Iranian soil, possibly in Iranian hands. The political pressure that creates in Washington alone would be enormous. The global reaction? Even bigger. And this is where the story begins. Because what we're seeing right now is not just a crash. It's the opening moment of a rapidly unfolding geopolitical event, one that could spiral in multiple directions depending on what happens next. And here is where things get serious. Because in situations like this, every second matters, every decision matters, every statement from either side can either calm tensions or ignite something much bigger. So the real question is, what exactly led to this moment? What was that aircraft doing there? And why does this feel like more than just an accident? Now let's break this down carefully, because understanding what just happened requires looking beyond the headline and into the details that are still emerging, piece by piece, minute by minute. According to early reports, this was a U.S. military fighter jet, an advanced aircraft, not some outdated relic, operating in or near contested airspace when something went terribly wrong. The crash occurred within Iranian territory, and almost immediately, both U.S. and Iranian monitoring systems would have detected the incident. Think about how fast that timeline unfolds. Within seconds of the crash, radar systems light up. Military command centers on both sides are alerted. Communication lines go into overdrive. And before the public even hears about it, officials in Washington and Tehran are already trying to figure out one thing: what just happened and what happens next. Now here's where things start to get complicated, because there are only a few realistic scenarios in a situation like this, and none of them are simple. Scenario 1, mechanical failure. The jet malfunctions mid-flight, loses control, and goes down. It's tragic, but technically explainable. However, that raises another question. Why was the aircraft in that location to begin with? U.S. military flights near Iran are not random. They are deliberate, calculated, and often tied to surveillance or strategic positioning. Scenario 2, navigational error. The aircraft unintentionally crosses into Iranian airspace. But let's be honest, these are highly trained pilots using some of the most advanced navigation systems in the world. Accidental entry into hostile territory? Possible, but highly unlikely without some kind of contributing factor. And then there's scenario 3, the one nobody wants to confirm, but nobody can ignore. The jet was engaged in an operation, and something went wrong. Now pause right there, because if that's true, we are no longer talking about an accident. We are talking about a mission. And if it was a mission, then the implications become far more serious. Was it reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, electronic surveillance, or something even more sensitive? And here is the part nobody is talking about. If Iran believes this aircraft violated its airspace intentionally, they may treat this not as a crash, but as an act of aggression. Think about that. From their perspective, this could be framed as a breach of sovereignty. And in international politics, perception matters just as much as reality, sometimes even more. Now let's talk about the 2 crew members. At this moment, they are missing. That word, missing, carries enormous weight in a situation like this, because missing can mean many things. It can mean they ejected safely and are awaiting rescue. It can mean they are injured and stranded, Or, and this is where the stakes escalate dramatically, it can mean they have been captured. And if that happens, everything changes. We've seen this before in history. Captured military personnel become leverage, negotiations begin, demands are made, political pressure builds, media narratives explode, and suddenly, what started as a crash turns into an international crisis. Let me explain what this means. The United States cannot afford to appear weak in a situation like this. At the same time, Iran cannot afford to appear passive if it believes its territory was violated. Both sides are locked into positions where backing down comes with a cost. So what do? That's the question unfolding right now behind closed doors. Military officials are analyzing flight data. Intelligence agencies are reviewing surveillance feeds. Diplomats are preparing statements, carefully worded, deliberately vague, designed to control the narrative without escalating the situation too quickly. But here is where things get serious. Because while officials are trying to manage the situation publicly, privately, contingency plans are already being discussed. Search and rescue operations, possible extraction missions, diplomatic channels, military readiness, all of it is happening simultaneously, and the clock is ticking. Because the longer those crew members remain unaccounted for, the higher the stakes become. The longer the crash site remains unsecured, the more sensitive technology could potentially fall into the wrong hands. Think about what that means. Modern fighter jets are not just aircraft, they are flying intelligence platforms, radar systems, communication equipment, classified technology. If any of that is recovered by Iran, it could shift the balance of information in the region. So now we're not just talking about people, we're talking about technology, we're talking about intelligence, we're talking about power. And this is where the story takes a turn, because what looked like a single incident is now revealing layers of risk, strategy, and potential consequences that go far beyond the crash itself. So the real question becomes, why does this matter so much right now? Because this is not happening in isolation. This is happening at a moment when the entire geopolitical landscape is already under pressure, fragile, unpredictable, and one miscalculation away from something much bigger. Let me explain what this means. The relationship between the United States and Iran has been tense for decades. We're talking about sanctions, proxy conflicts across the Middle East, cyber warfare, naval standoffs in the Persian Gulf, all of it forming a constant background of hostility. And in that kind of environment, even a small incident can act like a spark in a room filled with gas. Now imagine adding a downed U.S. fighter jet into that equation. Think about that for a second. This isn't just a technical issue. This isn't just a military problem. This is a political trigger point. Because the moment that aircraft hit the ground inside Iran, it created a situation where both sides are forced to respond, whether they want to escalate or not. And here is where things get serious. If the United States frames this as an accident, it risks appearing weak, especially if American personnel are in danger. But if it frames it as hostile interference, if there is even a suggestion that the jet was brought down, then pressure builds for a response. On the other side, Iran faces its own dilemma. If Iranian authorities confirm the aircraft entered their airspace, they can't simply ignore it. Their domestic audience expects strength. Their regional allies are watching. Their rivals are watching, and any sign of hesitation could be interpreted as vulnerability. So what do? They assert control, they secure the crash site, they control the narrative, and that's exactly why this situation is so dangerous, because now we're dealing with competing narratives. Was it an accident or a violation? Was it a malfunction or an interception? Was it a mistake or a message? And in geopolitics, the answer to those questions often depends less on facts and more on who controls the story. But here's the part nobody is talking about. This incident also sends a signal to the rest of the world. To countries like Russia and China, this is a real-time test of U.S. response. How does Washington react under pressure? Does it escalate? Does it negotiate? Does it hesitate? To U.S. allies in the region, Saudi Arabia, Israel, the Gulf states, this is a moment of reassurance or concern. They are asking one critical question. If something goes wrong, how quickly and how strongly will the United States act? Think about what that means. One crash, one incident. But the ripple effects stretch across continents. Financial markets could react if tensions rise. Oil prices could spike if there's any threat to stability in the region. Military readiness levels could increase, not just in the U.S. and Iran, but across multiple countries that are tied into this delicate balance. And this is where the situation becomes more than just a headline. It becomes a pressure point in an already strained system. Let that sink in. Because history has shown us that moments like this, unexpected, ambiguous, emotionally charged, are often the ones that lead to miscalculations. And miscalculations are what turn tensions into conflicts. Now ask yourself this: what if Iran reaches the crash site first and releases footage? What if they present evidence suggesting the jet was on a mission inside their territory? What if they claim sovereignty was violated? Suddenly the narrative shifts, and once that narrative takes hold, it becomes much harder for the United States to control the situation without taking some form of visible action. But on the flip side, what if the US releases its own data? What if it shows the aircraft was outside Iranian airspace before something happened? What if it claims interference or even aggression? Now the pressure shifts in the opposite direction. Do you see the pattern here? This is not just about what happened. It's about how it is interpreted. It's about who speaks first, who presents evidence, and who convinces the world. And this is where the story takes another turn. Because behind the public statements and official reports, there is always a deeper layer, a strategic calculation that most people never see. So the next question we have to ask is this just an incident, or is it part of something bigger? Is this just an incident, or is it part of something bigger? Because when you step back and look at the pattern, not just this event, but the buildup leading to it, you start to see something that feels far more deliberate than accidental. Let me explain. Military aircraft don't just appear near hostile borders by coincidence. Every movement, every patrol, every flight path is calculated. It is approved. It is tracked. It is part of a broader operational picture. So if a U.S. fighter jet ended up inside Iranian territory, there are only two possibilities. Either something went unexpectedly wrong, or something very intentional was already in motion. And this is where things get serious. Because in modern geopolitics, strategy is rarely about direct confrontation. It's about pressure. It's about signaling. It's about testing boundaries without crossing the line into full-scale conflict. Think about that for a second. What if this flight was part of a larger intelligence-gathering effort, monitoring Iranian defenses, mapping radar systems, testing response times? These are standard practices in high-tension regions, but they are also incredibly risky, and sometimes those risks don't stay contained. Now consider another angle. What if this wasn't just about surveillance? What if it was about sending a message? Because in global power politics, actions speak louder than statements. A military presence near or inside contested airspace can be interpreted as a signal of capability, of readiness, of intent. And here is the part nobody is talking about. Iran has been expanding its military posture in the region. Missile development, drone capabilities, regional alliances, these are not small developments. They shift the balance of power. At the same time, the United States has been reinforcing its own presence, working with allies, conducting joint exercises, maintaining strategic positioning. So what happens when both sides start pushing forward at the same time? You get friction, you get encounters, and sometimes you get incidents like this. But here's where the story takes a deeper turn, because strategy is not just about what happens in the air, it's about what happens behind the scenes. Intelligence agencies on both sides are constantly operating in the shadows. Cyber operations, surveillance networks, covert missions. This is a silent battlefield that most people never see. So we have to ask the uncomfortable question: was this jet simply flying? Or was it part of something more complex? Because if it was gathering intelligence, then the crash is not just a loss, it's a potential exposure. Think about what that means. Flight data, mission parameters, onboard systems. Even partial recovery of that information could give insights into U.S. capabilities, and if Iran gets access to that, that becomes a strategic gain. Now flip the perspective. If the United States believes there is even a small chance that sensitive technology could be recovered, what options does it have? Recovery missions, rapid response operations, even in extreme cases, denial strategies to prevent that technology from being exploited. Let that sink in. Because now we are no longer talking about a passive situation. We are talking about active decisions that could escalate tensions very quickly. And here is where the pressure builds. Every move from this point forward is calculated, not just for immediate impact, but for long-term positioning. If the U.S. acts too aggressively, it risks triggering retaliation. If it acts too cautiously, it risks losing strategic ground. If Iran acts too forcefully, it risks international backlash. If it acts too quietly, it risks appearing weak. So both sides are walking a very thin line, a line where one wrong step can change everything. And this is exactly how larger conflicts begin, not with grand declarations, but with moments like this, moments of uncertainty, moments where intentions are unclear and reactions are driven by pressure rather than clarity. Think about history. How many major conflicts started with an incident that at first seemed contained? One event, one misunderstanding, one escalation, and suddenly the situation spirals. Now ask yourself this: what are we not being told right now? Because while officials release controlled statements, the real strategy, the real decision-making, is happening behind closed doors. Military commanders analyzing response options, intelligence agencies assessing risk, political leaders weighing consequences, all of it unfolding in real time. And the public? The public sees fragments, headlines, briefings, carefully chosen words, but the full picture? That's something else entirely. And this is where the story becomes even more intense. Because once strategy comes into play, the next phase is inevitable: reaction. So the question now is, how is the world responding to this? And more importantly, what happens when those reactions start to collide? So how is the world responding to this? Because this is the moment where an incident stops being isolated and starts becoming global. Within minutes of the reports breaking, officials in Washington are scrambling. Defense departments, intelligence agencies, diplomatic channels, everything shifts into high alert mode. Statements are being drafted, revised, and rewritten in real time. Every word matters. Every sentence is calculated. Why? Because one wrong phrase could escalate the situation instantly. Now think about that pressure. You have a downed aircraft, 2 missing personnel, a hostile geopolitical environment, and the entire world watching how you respond. And this is where things get serious. Initial reactions are always cautious. You hear phrases like monitoring the situation, gathering information, committed to the safety of our personnel. But behind those calm, controlled statements, the urgency is very real. Search and rescue teams are being evaluated. Military assets are being repositioned. Contingency plans are being activated. All of it happening quietly, but rapidly. Now shift your focus to Iran, because their response is just as critical. Iranian authorities are not just dealing with a crash, they are dealing with a narrative. State media, military officials, government spokespeople, all of them are aligning on one message: control the story, control the perception. And here is the part nobody is talking about. If Iran reaches that crash site first, and there is a very real possibility of that, they hold the advantage in the information war. Think about what that means. They can release images, they can release footage, they can make claims about where the jet was, what it was doing, and why it was there. And once that narrative is out in the world, it spreads fast. Social media amplifies it, news networks debate it, analysts dissect it, and suddenly the pressure shifts. Because now the United States is not just dealing with the incident itself, it's dealing with the global perception of that incident. Let that sink in. Now look at the broader international reaction. Allies are watching closely. European governments are likely calling for restraint, urging both sides to avoid escalation. Behind the scenes, diplomatic channels are heating up. Quiet conversations, urgent messages, attempts to de-escalate before things spiral. But at the same time, regional players are calculating their own positions. Countries in the Middle East, especially those already aligned with or against Iran, are assessing what this means for their security. Does this signal a shift in U.S. posture? Does it indicate increased risk? Do they need to prepare for potential fallout? And then there are global markets. Because yes, this kind of event doesn't just stay in the political sphere. It moves into the economic world almost immediately. Oil prices become sensitive. Even the hint of instability in or around Iran, a major player in global energy, can trigger fluctuations. Investors start asking questions. Risk assessments change. Think about that for a second. One crash, and financial systems halfway across the world start reacting. That's the level of interconnectedness we're dealing with. Now let's talk about experts and analysts. Within hours, you have military analysts going on television, offering interpretations. Some are cautious, emphasizing the lack of confirmed details. Others are more direct, raising concerns about escalation, about potential capture scenarios, about strategic consequences. And here's where things get interesting, because even among experts, there is no single narrative. Some will argue this is likely an accident, unfortunate but contained. Others will say this is a dangerous flashpoint, one that could evolve quickly depending on how both sides respond. And that uncertainty, that's what makes this situation so volatile. Because when there is no clear understanding, people fill the gaps with assumptions. Governments prepare for worst-case scenarios. Media outlets amplify the most dramatic possibilities. Public opinion begins to form, often before the facts are fully known. And this is where the pressure intensifies, because now leaders are not just responding to the event, they are responding to perception, they are responding to expectations, they are responding to fear. And here is where the story takes another turn, because as reactions spread, something else begins to happen. Patterns start to emerge, signals start to align, and what initially looked like a single incident begins to connect with larger trends. So now the question becomes, is this just a reaction to a crash? Or is it revealing something much bigger about the direction the world is heading? Is this just a reaction to a crash? Or is it revealing something much bigger about the direction the world is heading? Because when you zoom out, when you really step back and look at the global landscape, you start to see that this moment fits into a much larger pattern, and that pattern is rising instability. Let me explain what this means. Over the past decade, the world has been shifting away from predictable power structures into something far more uncertain. The old systems, clear alliances, defined red lines, stable deterrence, they're not as solid as they used to be. Instead, what we're seeing now is fragmentation. Regional powers asserting themselves, global powers testing limits, conflicts that don't follow traditional rules. And in the middle of all that, incidents like this start to carry more weight than ever before. Think about that for a second. A single military accident 20 years ago might have been contained quickly, managed quietly, resolved diplomatically. But today, every incident becomes a signal. Every movement becomes a message. Every mistake becomes a potential flashpoint. And this is where things get serious, because the U.S. Iran dynamic is just one piece of a much larger geopolitical puzzle. You have tensions in Eastern Europe, strategic competition in the Pacific, economic rivalries shaping global trade, cyber warfare happening constantly beneath the surface. All of these pressures are happening at the same time. So when an event like this occurs, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It connects, it amplifies, it resonates across multiple fronts. Now think about how this plays into global perception. If the United States appears vulnerable, if it struggles to recover its personnel, if it loses control of the narrative, other global actors are watching closely. They're learning, they're adjusting their strategies, because in geopolitics, perception is power. And if Iran is able to leverage this situation, whether through information, negotiation, or strategic messaging, it sends a signal that challenges the existing balance. Let that sink in. Now flip it the other way. If the United States responds decisively, if it secures its personnel, controls the narrative, and stabilizes the situation, it reinforces its position. It sends a message of capability, of reach, of control. And that message doesn't just stay in the Middle East. It travels to allies, to rivals, to anyone paying attention. And trust me, everyone is paying attention. But here is the part nobody is talking about. This moment also highlights the increasing risk of miscalculation in a world where communication is faster, but understanding is not. Information spreads instantly, but it's often incomplete. Decisions are made quickly, but sometimes without full clarity. And in that kind of environment, the margin for error becomes dangerously small. Think about what that means. If one side misinterprets the other's actions, if a defensive move is seen as aggressive, if a recovery mission is seen as escalation, the situation can spiral before anyone has time to slow it down. And that's not a theoretical risk, that's a real one. We've seen near misses before, moments where tensions almost crossed the line but didn't. The question is, what happens when one of those moments goes further? Now consider the technological aspect. Modern warfare is faster, more precise, more complex. Aircraft, drones, surveillance systems, all operating in environments where seconds matter. So when something goes wrong, it doesn't just go wrong slowly. It happens fast. And the response has to be just as fast. Which brings us back to this crash. Because this isn't just about what happened in that moment. It's about how quickly both sides can interpret it, respond to it, and control the outcome. And in a world where speed often outruns certainty, that's a dangerous combination. And this is where the story begins to move forward, because once the bigger picture comes into focus, the next question becomes unavoidable. What happens next? Because the next moves, from both sides, will determine whether this remains a tense incident or becomes something far more serious. So what happens next? Because this is the moment where everything is still fluid, nothing is locked in yet. And in situations like this, the next 24 to 72 hours can define the entire trajectory of the crisis. Let me explain. Right now, both sides are assessing, calculating, watching each other very closely. And every possible scenario is on the table. Scenario 1, the best case. The crew members are found quickly, alive, and recovered without confrontation. Back-channel diplomacy kicks in. Quiet coordination, whether direct or indirect, helps de-escalate the situation. Public statements remain controlled, measured, careful. And just like that, what could have become a major crisis is contained. But think about how fragile that outcome is, because it depends on perfect timing, clear communication, and a willingness from both sides to avoid turning this into something bigger. Now consider scenario 2. The crew members are located, but not by the United States. If Iran reaches them first, everything changes instantly. Now we are dealing with a potential detention situation. Negotiations begin. Messaging intensifies. Each side starts using the situation to its advantage, politically, strategically, symbolically. And here's where things get serious. Because once personnel become part of the equation, domestic pressure inside the United States skyrockets. Bring them home. That becomes the message. And that pressure can push leaders into making decisions they might otherwise avoid. Think about that for a second. A rescue mission inside hostile territory? Risky. A negotiated release? Politically sensitive? A show of force? Potentially escalatory. Every option comes with consequences. Now let's move to scenario 3, the one that keeps military planners awake at night. The situation becomes unclear. Conflicting reports, unverified claims, delayed confirmation about the crew, each side releasing different versions of events. This is where miscalculation thrives, because uncertainty creates space for assumptions. And assumptions, especially in high-tension environments, can lead to overreaction. Imagine this. One side interprets a movement as preparation for escalation. They respond preemptively. The other side sees that response as aggression. And suddenly, the situation escalates beyond the original incident. Let that sink in, because that's how quickly things can spiral. Now here's another angle that cannot be ignored. Technology recovery. If there is even a possibility that sensitive equipment from that jet could be accessed, the United States faces a critical decision. Do they attempt recovery? Do they neutralize the site? Do they accept the loss? None of those choices are simple, because each one sends a message. And in geopolitics, messages matter. Now zoom out even further. How do allies respond in the coming days? Do they increase military readiness? Do they issue strong statements of support? Do they push for diplomatic restraint? All of these reactions contribute to the overall pressure surrounding the situation.